Hi, welcome to Krautrock with Brad and Carla. Is that what we decided to call it? I'm already blanking.
Yeah, I had Carla and Brad talk about Krautrock.
Oh, that's right. I can do it again. Hi, welcome to Carla and Brad talk about Krautrock. I'm Carla.
I'm Brad. We're here to talk about Krautrock.
We're off to a smashing start.
Yeah, we got to get the giggles out of the way. So it's been a while. So Carla and I go way back 30 years.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, that's what we're going to go with. It's probably more than that, but
we've been out of touch for a while, and we found each other again, which is fun. Mm-hmm. We've been on a very lively text thread with a couple of friends where we talk about music all day long and sometimes even do our jobs in between.
That's right.
And we got into Krautrock.
We did.
3 or 4 months. So how did we get here?
How did we get here? It is a tangled story. I actually think, did we start really talking about it when I had proposed wooden ships for the Mixtape Diaries episode? And I feel like we kind of wove into Krautrock somehow that way, but I can't really remember.
I think you're into wooden ships. I was into goat. We talked about those, and I think we were finding that we were really into psychedelic stuff. And why not reach back and find some more of it?
And boy, did we.
Yeah. I had listened to some of these bands before, right? This is German music in the 70s. Kosmische Rock, I think, is a term that I've seen. Maybe it starts out heavy psychedelic and it gets more ambient as time goes on. And there's a lot of stuff in between, inventing electronic music, sometimes for better, Kraftwerk, sometimes for worse. Also
Kraftwerk.
Oh, ouch. I was going to say Tangerine Dream. But,
oh, well.
Yeah, fair enough. And a lot of flutes, apparently.
A lot of flutes.
And we'll get to some of that later. But I bought this book a while ago, 1001 Albums to Hear Before You Die. And there was actually a website that had all of them up, and you could stream them. This was before Apple Music. Now, of course, I can stream them anyway. So I was playing a lot of Noi and a little bit of Can, right? And I was just kind of like nipping around the edges of this. And I think there was a point where I found like a top 15 Krautrock albums you should hear. And I sent that to the list, and you were the only one who bit. And I think we both played the first one and hated it. And then we looked for another list.
Yeah.
I think that's
exactly what happened.
And so anyway, I don't know how we got here, but the first album I think we're going to talk about, unless there's more to say.
No, I think let's just jump in.
We'll just get right into it. Yeah. Amon Düül. So the first question, is it Amon Düül II or Amon Düül II?
Oh.
I think we'll call it Amon Düül II.
Let's call it 2.
I'm so glad we chose Amon Düül II because I think it's fitting to inaugurate your Krautrock podcast with a band that has not one, but 2 umlauts consecutively.
It's very special.
Yeah. You don't see that much.
Sure don't.
Right. We figured what we do is we come on and we'll talk about an album each time. And the album Carla chose, actually, and I'm fully on board, is Yeti. Second album by Amon Düül II, issued April 1970, double LP, 4.5 stars on AllMusic. I'm wondering how it fell short, but maybe we can talk about that.
This was one of those records that really kind of set the tone. It's kind of revered as kind of the definition of Krautrock when you start to read some of the information about it. It's an interesting genre because there's not a lot of information out there about it. And I think it just always ends up kind of deferring to Kraftwerk or Noi or Can. When artists today reference that genre, they go to those 3 bands. But Amon Düül has an interesting history just in terms of how they came together. They were like part of a commune. You have to remember this was post-war Germany. There was just revolution kind of happening everywhere. I mean, when you think about what was happening in the world in the late 60s and early 70s, there was just, it sort of just bred this. These were all musicians who were living in this commune, and they just started jamming, like in the sense of what would happen when you get a bunch of musicians together, right? But then they sort of separated camps within that. So you had Amon Düül, and then the real musicians made Amon Düül II, and that's kind of where we ended up with these guys.
So I was down with COVID about 2 months ago, and I went full krautrock. It's one of those things where like you're just sitting in a room, this very room, and you're like, what am I going to do for 10 days, right? So I like started listening to all this stuff. I'm reading Julian Cope. I don't know if you found the Krautrock sampler book,
yes,
which you can read on the Internet Archive. Julian Cope read a whole book about krautrock and his favorite albums. So I started digging into that. I watched a movie about Baader Meinhof,
yes,
which is this crazy movie. I'll have to dig up the full title, but I watched that and was kind of getting a sense of what was going on in Germany at the time, and it sounded like there were a lot of people who, the Baader Meinhof complex is the name of the movie, and I think it was the name of what I went through watching it. Because it was just one bit of craziness after another that just blew up everything and hijacked everything. And it was just this generation of people who I think their parents had been Nazis.
Yeah.
And they were like, no more. Mm-hmm. And so everything that they saw around them, rightly or wrongly, in the late 60s was something that needed to be taken down because it was leading toward fascism. So you've got Amon Düül and a radical art commune was the phrase that I found online.
Yes.
Which, when you think about it, right, you think bongo drums, and it sounds like there was a lot of bongo playing in Amon Düül I. And I think, and
I believe so.
A fair amount in Amon Düül II.
Yes.
But it sounds like there was a point where maybe the guys and girls in two said, we want to do something else other than sit in a circle and jam out.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing I found interesting, I'd watched a documentary on YouTube, The Rebirth of Germany, and it was all about krautrock. Part of what spawned the movement is those musicians wanted something that wasn't American rock or English rock. Like, they really wanted to craft a new sound and in a way to put Germany on the map of having its own musical sound to go to. And the only music that was really popular in Germany at the time, I think it was called Schlager, which is sort of like a...
It's like people in short pants and suspenders, jumping around and, folk music. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dondolo, wir sind verliebt, wir sind froh, sag mir, was kann denn schöner sein? Dondolo, wir tauschen nichts dafür ein.
The clips of that were hilarious.
I know. Those are good. So I think part of that, too, kind of stemmed out of, other world experiences that they had and just really wanted to create something that was very different and was very uniquely German, that was still in a rock realm.
I feel like I read somewhere, because I know I didn't come up with this on my own. I feel like I read somewhere where they were, and maybe this isn't as true of Amon Düül II, but it was like rock and roll stripped of the R&B, Delta blues stuff that made it American.
Yes.
And they replaced it instead with avant-garde composer stuff like Karlheinz Stockhausen.
Yes, yeah.
Who I think was like a guy who Can's bassist worked with. Maybe we'll talk about this if we ever get to Can. I was going to say when, and then I went to if.
Hopefully we'll get to Can.
Yeah, right. There's nobody here with a gong or anything, so we can do whatever we want. I read somewhere that's really it, is that a lot of the kind of R&B shake your hip stuff went out in favor of this more mechanistic, modernist, ambient type stuff.
Yeah. Still with a lot of folk instruments, though, which we can talk about as we kind of get into that record, but a lot of sitar, a lot of folk violin, all these different instruments that they just keep layering on top of kind of your traditional percussion and guitar sounds.
And having said all that about getting the blues and the soul out of rock, right, and making it Euro, that may not have been true at all of Amon Düül. I read that I think probably the principal musician, Chris Carter, if I'm going to say that right, he saw Jimi Hendrix play in '67. It was like, I got to go now to this commune because it's the place where I'm going to play music. The singer Renata Knaup said, I always wanted to be a soul singer, in the same way that Hendrix was a soul singer. Mm-hmm. So maybe they're not quite on the same beaten path as Can and Neu, and I think maybe
they definitely stand out when you listen to their records, and then if you switch over to a Can or a Neu record, there is a distinct difference, I think, just in their sound.
Right. And so maybe at some point we'll have a definition of what krautrock is other than German music, and maybe that's ultimately only what it is. But let's talk about Yeti.
I love Yeti. I think what's interesting about it, because I've listened to a number of their other records, and this is by far the most polished of them. And they actually did have a single off of this album, like a true single. I don't really know if it ever charted, but it was released as a single.
And their music doesn't lend itself to
No,
singles, really.
no. And this is really the only one of their records that has some kind of, you know, the songs are 3 to 4 minutes long instead of 15 to 25 minutes long, because they tend to just be long sweeping songs that just kind of, it's almost like 3 songs in one every time you listen to one of those 25-minute ones, which is wonderful, but also you're like, am I still on the same song? Like, what happened?
Right. And then you realize that because they were working with records, they probably would have made these songs even longer if they didn't run out of space on the side of a record.
Yeah.
The single was Archangel's Thunderbird.
Correct.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So on Spotify, it has like 1.5 million listens, and none of the other tracks has more than 500K. So I was thinking, is it just that song has such an awesome name? It's Archangel's Thunderbird, and why wouldn't you play that as many times as you could? Or they actually did release it then.
They did release it. I read that was the only song that was ever really technically released.
So that's side B, track 1 of the first record. So the first record is of the double LP, right? It's much more straightforward. They're songs of reasonable song length. It starts off with Soap Shop Rock, which is, I guess it's a suite, quote unquote. It's got 4 tracks rolled into it, and it begins and ends with the same kind of garage rock sounding theme. But the rest of it, it's just songs. And then the second record is, all the songs have the subtitle Improvisation, which we can talk about in a minute. And that's where you get like your 18 minutes, right?
It goes all over the place, but in a good way. I mean, I enjoy that. But also, I mean, I think it's why you and I gravitate toward this style of music, just because of some of the other bands that we tend to listen to a lot. And for me, every time I listen to this, I'd be like, this sounds so modern. And then you look at when it came out, it would be like 1969 and 1971. And it blows my mind, because sometimes the songs sound like they would have just come out.
Right. It definitely has this psychedelic feel to it, but there's nothing about it that says we just left this in the 60s and we're not going to go back to it. Right. It's definitely present and terrific. So, not to go on and on about Goat, but I feel like there's plugged in Amon Düül Yeti, and then there's unplugged Amon Düül Yeti, and you get, I don't know if it's like half and half, but you get a fair amount of each on here, right? And the unplugged sounds a lot like the third Goat record, which is also a lot of acoustic guitars, a lot of bongo drums. They have the flute.
Yes.
Right? By the way, I'm sitting here thinking, like, is this prog rock? Am I on my way to Jethro Tull? Like, am I on a slippery slope?
We are not. We are not going there, Brad. We are not.
Okay.
It will not happen. But I had the same internal struggle that maybe that was happening.
I'm online. It says, Rolling Stone called this the 41st best prog rock album ever, and I'm thinking, well, that's horrible news because it's prog rock, or maybe it's good news because like, there are 40 other albums that are at least more prog than that, right?
Right.
And the hard stuff also, has that just world music-y, but also heavy distorted guitar type garage psychedelia feel that Goat has for me. So just as a comparison, here's a clip from last track of the album, Sandoz in the Rain. And here's what Goat's doing 30, 40 years later.
I just think it's interesting that we, when you listen to an artist like Goat and you hear some of those just really more unique things we would consider to be more part of like world music, like we talked about a little earlier. These were just all sounds that they were using in the early 70s to just kind of create this genre that they were just experimenting with different sounds and techniques and just to see what they could create. But it's all kind of set against what they always call that motoric beat, right? So there's a constant beat, or there's something constant that goes through the entire song, even if it's 25 minutes long, and then they just keep layering all these other sounds in over top of it. And whether it's something traditional, like garage style, grungy, distorted guitars, or it's a flute or a sitar, right, or it's more bongos, there's still a constant that's running through all those songs. And I think Goat kind of does that too, to a degree.
Yeah, and I think they both have that kind of collective, right? I mean, Goat has an album called Commune, right?
Yes, I feel like there's 14 people in the band.
Right. There's such variety on this. I mean, it starts out with Burning Sisters, the first track, and it's just straight ahead garage rock. And I love it. And the minute it landed, I was like, oh, yeah, I'm going to love this album. By the end, right, you've got the flutes, you've got the noodling around with guitars and bongos. I have a theory here, which is that Yeti's tracking us through the full psychedelic experience from like 1966 to 71, right?
Yeah.
So you get started, you're like digging on this straightforward garagey,
like rock.
Yeah.
Like more classic kind of rock sounds.
Right. Straight ahead stuff. Quickly, you're hearing violins, Eastern mysticism stuff, right? Bad trips.
It has like an opium den quality to it.
Yeah. So you got that bad trip, right? And then at the end, you're doing 20-minute improvisations with flutes, and you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. We should talk about the cover. Right?
Yes.
The cover.
Please. You need to tell the story about the cover.
I think there's some confusion about who it is, but I went online to confirm. So Julian Cope describes the cover as follows. So this should appear, hopefully we can get this uploaded with the episode, what a cover looks like. But Julian Cope's quote from his book, Krautrock Sampler: "Schrat the bongo player with his weird low forehead and a strange peasant dress, wielding a huge scythe across a field of bright yellow ground fog." And that's actually the cover that Julian Cope used for his book, right? Selected it among all the 50 albums that he's talking about and that he's listed. It turns out, I don't think it was Schrat the bongo player. It was this guy, Wolfgang Krischke, who was a sound guy. And maybe you can talk about what became of Wolfgang Krischke.
Well, that's what I read, that poor Wolfgang had a bad LSD trip and he died of hypothermia in the woods.
Right. So, he went home to see his family, dropped acid. Right.
Had a bad trip, died in the woods. So, but this was Amon Düül's way to honor him, as he was their sound man, and he wanted to be a part of the band. I think I had read that in probably that same article, that he wanted to be a part of the band in some other way, and so they felt like this was a nice way to honor their friend.
Right. And that kind of feeds into what how I'm thinking about this, which is that, 1966, maybe you start listening to some garage music. 5 years later, you have no idea what happened to you, and you're lying on the ground freezing to death in the middle of a field, right?
Yep.
And it feels like 70 minutes went by, and that's this Yeti double album. I think it covers all the ground. Any other particular tracks you want to call out?
I think it's interesting. It's something that I read really talked about how actually, the 9-10 songs that they broke out kind of as quote unquote singles were really improvisations, just like their other songs. They just broke them at a place where, would make sense to break them and make them more like a standard length of song. And so I think if you think about it from that perspective, you could see how like the first 3 are real like rock heavy, and they were probably all one song at one point, and then they split them into 3. I do really love the guitar in Hallucination Guillotine. They have great song names.
Yeah.
Flesh-colored anti-aircraft alarm.
Right.
That's great.
Beautiful. Right.
So great.
That's the one with the electric violin on it.
It is.
It has a lot of kind of Eastern vibe to it. It almost feels like, all right, that they're diving a little deeper. That's maybe the 4th track.
4th track, yeah.
So there's this minute-long thing called Gulpa Sonata.
Yeah.
Which is a totally fucked up fake opera thing.
Yes.
And it's probably not surprising that this is where the Spotify hit count just
really plummeted.
Yeah. I sent this album to a friend of mine who he was really into Pink Floyd in college, and I had to hear echoes all the time, and the bleeding dolphins and everything else.
Yeah.
And so I thought, you're gonna like this, and so I sent it to him, and he responded back, it was great until they started singing.
Yeah. And I get it. I mean, I think I've even made the comment, sometimes I just wish there wasn't vocal in this.
Yeah.
But it's part of the experiment. I can't remember if I saw this in one of the things I watched on YouTube or if I read it, but John Lydon, or Johnny Rotten, is credited as saying his vocal style was modeled after Amon Düül's.
I can hear that. Right.
Yeah.
There is a throaty kind of yelpy thing that he's doing that is very affected and very strange. And at times I feel like it's distracting me from what's coming from the instruments.
Totally.
Right, which is fabulous.
I agree.
Renata, for all of her talk of saying she wanted to be a soul singer, she's doing a lot of opera here. There's a little bit of Grace Slick going on here, but like if you took Grace Slick and you distilled her to her purest essence and like hit someone over the ears with it, I feel like that's what Renata is doing on some of the stuff. But Archangel Thunderbird, she's got the lead on the vocals there, right? That's the single, and she comes out swinging, and it's terrific. Cerberus is one that I like a lot, and probably not coincidentally there are no vocals on it. Yeah. That's the one with the acoustic guitars and the bongo drums. The people are on the bongo drum. A lot of times you would think it's just some stoned out person playing 16th notes.
Yes.
Like, whoever's on the bongo drums is like, this is virtuoso bongo play.
It really is. That's a great track.
It goes electric at some point in the middle, and it's not even clear how it happens. I don't know if they just overlaid the electric over the last 30 seconds of the acoustic and just so that it just lands on it, and suddenly it's entirely electric, heavily distorted. We'll do a clip of that here too. So maybe that half a star that All Music deducts is vocals related.
It's probably vocals related. But also, I think we're so used to very polished. We're just used to polished vocals because that's just how American pop and English pop, while it may be a little gritty here and there and have some different nuances, ultimately it's pretty polished. It's not this screaming, distorted kind of.
Right.
I mean, he is singing words, but it's very differently.
It's like, I think there are times where it really works. I think Eye Shaking King, that's just an immense track. It's just so heavy. It's slow and driving. It definitely has a Hendrix kind of Purple Haze
that one does for
beat
sure
to it.
Yep.
But I think it's more powerful. Like, no, I'm never going to say, the guitar play on this song is better than Hendrix, because then there's this sniper that takes a shot at you and you're never heard from again.
Right.
But I just think this song rocks.
No, I do too. I agree. I just think it's interesting how just the progression. I feel like this is a band where you can, if you're like, I don't know that I like this song, do not turn it off. Because if you just let it burn for like another 90 seconds, it's going to take a real turn. And then you might like it. It's like you just can't give up on it.
Right. Give it the full 70 minutes. So on that score, let's talk about the improvisations. So, like, they call this improvisation, but I really think they just sat down and said, all right, we're just going to jam, and here we go. I mean, they must have had a plan.
They had to have had a plan. There are tracks on other records of theirs, if you listen to, you're like, I don't think they had a plan when it seems much more improvisational than this does. Right. But that's not a dig against any of these songs. They're really wonderful.
Yeah.
And Yeti, the first of the improvisation tracks, is really the one that is revered as quintessential krautrock.
That's the 18-minute, the entire side of the second disc. Mm-hmm. And it just builds and it builds. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about. You might have to wait a little longer than 90 seconds on the 18-minute
on that
track,
one, you're going to want to give that baby 7-8 minutes. Just let it burn.
So good.
It's so good.
My notes say viscous guitars. I don't even know what that means.
I don't know what that means, but
I wrote this a while ago. Yeah. Sandoz in the Rain, we mentioned it and we even played a clip of it. Apparently Sandoz is the Swiss lab in which they first synthesized LSD in the 1930s.
Oh.
That's about as coded a reference as calling a song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds.
Sure is.
That said, like, if you had to get that far, if you had to get to the last track on the double album before you heard LSD here, right, then you're listening to the wrong podcast.
That's right.
It's from the get-go.
That's right. I read that last track actually does have members of the original Amon Düül in it. Like Amon Düül 1 and 2 are together on that track.
So I have not listened to any more Amon Düül II. You should school us on what you've heard. I did listen to the first Maybe it wasn't the first. It was maybe the second Amon Düül I album. And it is exactly what was described, which is that they're sitting around jamming for extended periods, and you can imagine that there were a handful of people that were involved in this, and they just got up and stalked off and said, we're going to do our own thing. Like,
yeah.
Enough already. I enjoyed it, actually. I have to figure out which one it was. But talk about the other Amon Düül, the rest of the Amon Düül oeuvre, if I can use a French word in the Krautrock broadcast.
So I've listened to the first record, and I'm probably not going to pronounce this correctly, so you can help me with the German, but is it Phallus Dei?
That was Latin, I think.
Is that Latin?
Phallus Dei, yeah. Phallus of God.
Yes.
So. Yeah. In your face. Christianity.
Very, yeah. Much more experimental sounding than even Yeti. Drums and percussion are much heavier in that record, whereas I think guitars are a little more forward in Yeti, but it's much more built around percussion. It also has this very like cinematic quality. All the songs are like 20 minutes long. Right. So it's one of those things where you're like, am I still on the same song? You kind of like look up after a while and you're like, oh, I'm still on the same song. Okay, cool. Right. But they all have kind of a movie soundtrack quality to them in a experimental way. They're still using sitars and folk violins and different kinds of instruments like that. It's a little messier. And so when you listen to that record and then you listen to Yeti seems much more polished, which to our discussion about the improvisation, the first record sounds very much like it was a true improv and they just were like recording it as they were playing. Whereas Yeti seems to be like a little more put together.
We're calling you liars, Amon Düül II, because you're saying that's improvisation and we think it's too good.
It's too good. I don't know.
So that was pre-Renata, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's what it was really intended to be, right? It was the soundtrack for your trip. Right?
Yeah. Right. Yes.
Whatever you were seeing needed sound alongside it, and that would be it over the next 40, 50, however many minutes.
Exactly. I also listened to the record that came after Yeti.
The Dance of the Lemmings, Tons der Lemminge, something like that.
Yes.
The Frau, my German teacher. If she's listening to this, she's in a sad state right now, as I'm trying to say.
Well, that's better than me because I can't even pronounce the word. So,
Tons der Lemminge.
I've listened to that one. I like that one too. To me, it has almost more of a modern rock feel to it. When you listen to it, you're like, oh, I can hear weird things like Coldplay, or it's like you could see where some of the more popular bands today definitely took influence from some of these earlier recordings. I would probably steer away from the very last Amon Düül record.
Okay. I got to give you credit for like bulldozing through the whole thing.
I wanted to hear how they progressed, honestly, I wanted to hear how they started, how we got to Yeti, which is such a terrific album. And then what happened to them after that. The last record for sure is just like a bunch of tracks that they just had laying around and just decided to throw on an album because the genres mix so much that it's literally distracting. One sounds like David Bowie, the next one is like speed metal. Like then it goes to like, this is where I made my Dennis DeYoung comment, then the next song's like Dennis DeYoung.
Right, the thread said Dennis DeYoung. Yeah, the text thread.
It's a real roller coaster of genres, and that came out in 76. That's Pyrogony is the last record.
Jillian Cope on Amon Düül II says, Amon Düül II's music was definitely badly affected by the constant comings and goings in the band. They've certainly recorded their fair share of shit.
Well, and that's probably actually why the sound starts to differ so much, is that the band really started to change after Yeti. I mean, they had quite a big lineup change as all those records progressed.
And so Yeti has all this variety in it, but it's all cooked in, and it's all swirled in masterfully. But if you're bringing all those disparate elements and you're just smashing them together,
it starts to lose its punch a little bit, which, maybe why when people talk about Krautrock a lot, you hear more about Can and Neu and Kraftwerk, it's like those are the three, like we talked about earlier, those are the three that you tend to hear reference most regularly. And I think just because maybe their body of work stayed a little bit more consistent over time than Amon Düül II's did.
Yeah. Well, and I think what they were doing probably they were shaping and crafting into something more distinctive than this. You could unfairly just call this psychedelia. Yeah.
And just truly experimental.
Right. And that was what I initially did. I said, all right, Pink Floyd friend, you're going to love this because, right, this is Piper at the Gates of Dawn, but better, harder, more challenging. Mm-hmm. It's like the graduate level Piper at the Gates of Dawn. And so I think it was just that pushing. Yeah, you guys were hanging out in London and the UFO Club and making a scene, right? We're in a commune banging this stuff out on bongos, right? And the Bader Meinhof gang sometimes show up in our house. Like, I don't know if you saw that. There was a part where they were saying, we didn't really want
them there. That's a good documentary. We should link that if we can.
So you were talking about the one on YouTube. Is that the BBC?
Yeah.
That's pretty terrific because it takes you through 7 or 8 of the bands, right? And maybe we'll hit them.
Yeah.
Not Tangerine Dream.
Tangerine.
Our promise to you today. It hasn't happened.
We will not talk about Tangerine Dream. No, sir.
It just doesn't do anything for us.
Sure doesn't. They also have like 50 records. So.
Right, because I think it's when you play one note for a half hour, you can just play a different note for a half hour, and that's your second album.
That's it. And there's number 2. So.
Yeah. One thing I did want to hit, Peter Leopold, the drummer, I sent a video of them playing I Shaking King live.
Yes.
And I'm watching the drummer, and I got such a man crush on what he's doing.
He's amazing.
I've been downstairs in my basement trying to play Burning Sister, and I think I can kind of do it. And I can kind of play Hallucination Guillotine. And then I'll hit a wall. I'm like, forget it. I'm not worthy.
He's pretty amazing. Yeah. The musicianship is that's what keeps me coming back, I think, to the genres in general, too. It's just the musicianship is just so good. I mean, they're just so good. Right. He's an incredible drummer.
And I guess it's just time spent. Like, you're looking at these people, they're probably 20, 21, 22 years old, right?
Yeah.
But they've just done nothing for the last 4 or 5 years but play music. Mm-hmm. And that's how you get there. I don't know that we have the kind of society that's going to give us anything like that. Well, I don't know. I mean, we do have goat. We have goat. For all we know, they could be 50. We haven't seen their faces.
This is true. We don't get to see their faces because they just wear terrifying masks.
Right.
But I think that is also to say, will we see another genre of music, right? We keep seeing, like, even goat. We did kind of make an argument that could be influenced by some of this genre per se, right? So I don't know. I think that was just an interesting time. A lot of different music just came out of that time. And I think not to segue into the 1971 documentary series, but
yeah, let's do that.
But it's insane when you look at it packaged that way that all of those different music genres, and there's a little snippet of Krautrock in there.
I haven't got to yet, but
there's a little snippet. It's of the YouTube video that you sent around to all of us. It's either Can or Neu, I can't remember, but
okay.
You had sent us a link to a video, and I watched it, and then we were watching that episode of 1971. I was like, oh, I just watched this.
That's funny.
So, but it's interesting just to see the diversity of the type of music that was really becoming prevalent in that time period, and it was all being born out of this post-war
just churn of social upheaval.
Yeah.
And it's funny you say that because I was watching one of those episodes yesterday, and I was watching the one that it's got Gil Scott-Heron in it.
Oh, yes. I love that one.
It's talking about the Attica riot,
mm-hmm.
right? Which I knew nothing about except Al Pacino chanting Attica in Dog Day Afternoon. So, all right. So now I finally know. But I'm sitting there thinking, oh, well, they're not even talking about Bader Meinhof, which was just running roughshod over Germany at the time. Like, just, it was insane. I wrote a friend about having watched the Bader Meinhof Complex movie, and I was just like these people were just
nuts,
unfettered. Yes. And my friend writes back, he goes, I don't know if you know, but there were like 1,600 bombings a year in the United States, like during that same period. And I'm like, who was bombing what and when, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of bombing empty buildings, which
Yeah.
is sort of like half gutsy, but I think it's the right kind of bombing,
Yeah.
if you ask me. But yeah, in the middle of this, the sense I have of Amon Düül II is they're looking at England, right? They're looking at the people doing the umpampa stuff,
Yes.
slapping their thighs
Yes.
on TV, and they're like, "Oh man, we're gonna take what we're hearing out of England, and we are gonna like amp it up 3-4 times over, and
Yeah.
we got all the time in the world,
Yeah.
because we don't want any part of what's going on in this country other than to just make music."
Yeah.
Good for them. If you can swing it. So is this prog? Is this prog rock?
No, it's not prog rock.
Okay.
I read that it got lumped into prog rock until Julian Cope's book came out.
Oh, good. Okay.
And then it became Krautrock again.
Right. The other thing that I've seen, by the way, is that every one of these bands wants to not be called krautrock.
Yeah.
And maybe because there is such a diversity within that collection or
Yeah.
that category. Faust comes out with a song and it's called krautrock, and everyone just gets slammed into that category.
Yeah.
But far better that than prog rock, right?
Far better. Well, and also Kraut, because it has kind of an association with a soldier, right? Wasn't that their term for like a German soldier?
Right, it's derogatory.
I think was
Yeah.
kind of like, yeah, it was like a little bit derogatory. So you can tell when you
Yeah.
watch any of these documentaries or read anything about any of these bands, they all talk about how they are not happy that it's called Krautrock, but
Right.
they don't want it to be called prog rock either, apparently, without
Right.
saying that out loud.
Right. Like you can either all be lumped together in a category, or you can be in there with Supertramp and Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. Is
No.
that going to be our tagline? I don't think so.
No, it is not. I veto that.
You won't get much argument from me. Anything else you want to say about Yeti or Amon Düül II?
I feel like we
we've tapped
covered it.
out.
I think we covered it.
All right, one more clip. Leave it there. All right, this was Carla and Brad talk about Krautrock.
See you next time.
See you next time. Actually, do we have a choice for next time? Should we make that decision live?
Let's make that decision live.
Can we do that?
Yeah, we can do whatever
All
we
right.
want.
I'm kind of obsessed with Noi.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad you said that. I was hoping you would pick Noi.
I think I'm gonna pick Noi 2
Okay.
or Noi 2, whatever it is, whatever you want to call it. Look for us at some date TBD in the future to talk about Noi 2.